Samara Academic Opera and Ballet House is not a place built for violence. Yet on November 6, 2025, it carried the weight of it with unusual calm. This wasn't a roaring arena drenched in chaos. It was something more surgical, almost reverent, as if the room itself understood that what was about to happen demanded attention rather than noise. A live brass band echoed through the hall, filling the space with an old-world gravity that made the walkouts feel ceremonial rather than hostile. Denis Gubarev emerged first, the hometown fighter, moving with that quiet stiffness common to young heavyweights who know they are expected to push forward rather than think backward. His record was modest, his resume still under construction, but his presence carried the familiar energy of a fighter who believes pressure alone can bend a fight in his favor. Across the ring, waiting to be summoned, was Abakarov, taller, older in ring years, and carrying the kind of stillness that does not come from inactivity, but from patience earned the hard way. Abakarov was undefeated, yes, but more important than that, he was unhurried. He hadn't boxed professionally in over 2 years, yet there was no visible rust in the way he moved his shoulders. No nervous pacing, no wasted motion. This fight was scheduled for 6 rounds, an IBA Pro contest that wouldn't necessarily live on a traditional professional record. But inside that limitation was freedom. Freedom to experiment. Freedom to assess. Freedom to dominate without destruction. From the moment both men stood opposite each other, awaiting final instructions, the difference in intent was already visible. Gubarev's posture suggested advancement, engagement, and collision. Abakarov's stance suggested observation, calculation, and correction. Both men stood around 6'5", both classified as heavyweights, but height alone has never dictated control. When the bell rang, there was no explosion, no reckless charge. Instead, there was space, measured, negotiated, and tested. Each man reached with his lead hand, not to land, but to map the other's reactions. Gubarev's jab came textbook, straight from the guard, predictable but earnest. Abakarov's jab came from below the line of sight, rising like a thought Gubarev didn't see until it was already there. This was the first quiet signal of what the fight would become. Not a battle of strength, but a contest of permission. Who would allow the other to fight, their preferred fight? Who would dictate where exchanges began, and more importantly, where they ended? Abakarov's low-held left hand, a relic of his kickboxing background, was not decorative. It was a trap disguised as negligence. Gubarev stepped forward again, confident in volume, unaware that every step forward was being catalogued. By the end of the first round, nothing dramatic had happened, yet everything had been decided. One man had learned where the other would always be, and the other hadn't learned anything at all. If there is a punch that defines Abakarov's approach to this fight, it is not a power shot, not a combination, and not a moment that would ever go viral in isolation. It is the jab from the hip, thrown without announcement and delivered with a deceptive thud that accumulates damage psychologically before it ever does physically. As the second round began, the difference between the two heavyweights stopped being subtle and started becoming structural. Gubarev continued to advance in straight lines, his feet honest but his head stationary, trusting his guard to absorb whatever came his way. Against many fighters, that approach can be effective. Against a man who understands leverage, distance, and delayed release, it becomes an invitation. Abakarov leaned back slightly, loading his weight onto the rear foot, and snapped the jab upward as Gubarev crossed into range. It wasn't flashy, but it landed again, and again. Each time Gubarev tried to establish offense, he was forced to reset, not by fear, but by interruption. The jab didn't just score points, it broke rhythm. It prevented combinations before they could even form. Gubarev's response was effort, throwing more punches on the inside, attempting to create moments through physicality rather than timing. The crowd appreciated the intent, but intent does not close distance without adjustment. Abakarov's true statement came midway through the round when he introduced the counter right uppercut. As Gubarev dipped slightly to press forward, expecting to land inside, Abakarov split the space between them with an uppercut that arrived clean and precise, not thrown with malice, but with understanding. It was the kind of punch that doesn't rock the body dramatically, but rearranges thought patterns. From that moment on, Gubarev hesitated just enough to make every forward movement less committed. That hesitation is fatal against a fighter who thrives on fractions of seconds. Abakarov did not chase the moment. He simply repeated it. Jab, space, uppercut. Jab, lean, exit. Gubarev answered every shot, proving his toughness. But toughness without variation becomes predictability, and predictability feeds timing. By the end of the second round, Abakarov wasn't ahead because he had done more. He was ahead because he had allowed less. He had quietly taken ownership of the distance between them, turning the ring into a place where Gubarev could move forward, but never arrive on his own terms. The third round was where the fight lost its polish and revealed its truth. Both men began to collide more frequently, heads brushing, shoulders bumping, exchanges dissolving into physical wrestling rather than clean boxing. For Gubarev, this was familiar territory. Chaos offered opportunity. Inside fighting allowed him to turn effort into presence. For Abakarov, this was not ideal, but it also wasn't dangerous. What became evident was the difference between being comfortable in chaos and being effective within it. Gubarev worked hard on the inside, throwing slapping hooks and short punches, some landing, some grazing, many simply occupying space. Abakarov, despite his height and longer limbs, showed surprising composure, rolling shoulders, smothering shots, and firing brief responses before stepping offline. The referee's commands to break were increasingly treated like suggestions, and both fighters continued after the call more than once, revealing the intensity building beneath the surface. At one point, Abakarov pushed Gubarev back toward the ropes after a stoppage, stealing moments where he could, while Gubarev defended himself instinctively, hands still active even when the exchange had technically ended. It was messy, imperfect, and emotionally charged. Yet, even here, the pattern remained unchanged. Abakarov's punches, though fewer, arrived cleaner. His body shots came with placement. His left hook to the body landed when Gubarev's weight was forward, not when he was braced. Gubarev, for all his determination, spent much of the round reacting rather than initiating effectively. When the bell ended the third, there was no clear dramatic swing, but the fight had reached its midpoint with one truth standing tall. Pressure alone was not enough to turn the tide. The man dictating when exchanges ended was winning, regardless of who started them. By the fourth round, Basir Abakarov had found something deeper than rhythm. He had found comfort. That comfort translated into sharper combinations, smoother exits, and more frequent scoring without overcommitment. The jab from the hip continued to arrive with irritating consistency, and now it was being followed by brief two-punch sequences that disrupted Gubarev's balance. Gubarev, to his credit, never stopped pressing. He kept stepping forward, attempting to pin Abakarov near the black corner, trying to force extended exchanges where volume might overcome precision. But every time he closed space, Abakarov changed angle, spun off, or intercepted him with a short uppercut that halted momentum. The difference in ring IQ became glaring. Gubarev moved like a train on tracks, powerful but bound to a direction. Abakarov moved like a switch, capable of changing direction without warning. As the round progressed, Abakarov began feinting more, drawing reactions from Gubarev that he could exploit. Small shoulder twitches, half steps, subtle dips. Each feint extracted information, and each response reinforced the same pattern. Gubarev reacted honestly every time. That honesty cost him. By the final minute of the round, Abakarov's confidence was visible not in celebration, but in patience. He stood stock still at times, inviting Gubarev forward, knowing exactly what would come next. When the bell rang, the gap between effort and effectiveness had widened into something undeniable. Round 5 was not about dominance, it was about accumulation. Gubarev landed his best shots here, including a solid jab and a brief double attack to the body and head that showed he was still searching for a way back into the fight. But even in his best moments, the responses came faster. Abakarov slipped just enough to avoid clean damage, then answered with a right uppercut that snapped Gubarev's head upward, breaking whatever rhythm he had momentarily established. This was the cost of linear aggression without head movement. Every forward step became a risk assessment that favored the calmer fighter. Abakarov's punches were not thrown with desperation. They were thrown with punctuation. Each one ended a sentence before the next could begin. Gubarev's volume looked impressive in flashes, but his shots rarely landed in sequences long enough to change momentum. The clock, increasingly, favored the man in control. Abakarov didn't rush. He didn't hunt a stoppage. He simply continued doing what had worked for 5 rounds, controlling distance, selecting moments, and refusing to be drawn into emotional exchanges. When the bell ended the round, Gubarev's urgency was clear. Abakarov's composure was clearer. The 6th round opened with a quiet understanding between both fighters. Gubarev needed something significant. Abakarov needed nothing reckless. The contrast in objective shaped everything that followed. Gubarev pressed harder, swinging wider, trying to break through with flurries that excited the crowd, but lacked sustained accuracy. Abakarov answered with singles, then stepped away, allowing the seconds to bleed away while maintaining the appearance of engagement. On the inside, arms tangled, forearms pressed, and the referee intervened repeatedly, his authority tested by 2 fighters unwilling to disengage cleanly. Abakarov began adopting a lower guard again, confident in his reads, daring Gubarev to overextend. When Gubarev did, the counters came, not heavy, but clean enough to reinforce control. The final exchanges were spirited but inconclusive. Gubarev swung, Abakarov responded, and the bell arrived not as a climax, but as a conclusion already written. When the bell rang to end the fight, there was applause, not because the crowd had witnessed destruction, but because they had witnessed effort. 6 rounds of work, discipline, and persistence had unfolded in a space better known for elegance than brutality, and the fighters acknowledged each other with respect. Gubarev never stopped competing. That mattered. But boxing does not reward persistence alone. It rewards command. As the fighters awaited the decision, the visual story told everything numbers would later confirm. Abakarov stood relaxed, breathing steady, posture upright. Gubarev paced, shoulders rising and falling, aware that effort does not always translate to victory. The announcement confirmed what the fight had suggested since its midpoint, a majority decision victory for Basir Abakarov, No controversy followed. The verdict reflected control, timing, and cleaner work across the rounds. It was not a judgment against Gubarev's heart, but an acknowledgement of Abakarov's superiority in managing space. In a sport obsessed with finishes, this decision carried quiet authority. It demonstrated that dominance can exist without devastation. This bout was a lesson disguised as entertainment. It reminded anyone watching closely that height does not dictate inside fighting, that pressure without angles becomes predictable, and that a jab thrown with intention can neutralize aggression more effectively than power. Abakarov's kickboxing background did not make him reckless. It made him adaptable. Gubarev's traditional approach was not flawed, but incomplete. Against fighters who understand timing, straight lines eventually end at dead stops. Basir Abakarov's return to the ring was not explosive, but it was instructive. He showed that long absences do not erase understanding, and that intelligence ages better than aggression. This fight will not be remembered for highlights, but it will be remembered by those who study boxing closely. In Samara, under orchestral echoes and measured applause, one heavyweight did not conquer his opponent. He simply removed his options. And sometimes that is the most complete victory of all.